to a tie game with an amazing two-run homer in the ninth inning. Altuve with a 2-1 count on him. Chapman went after him and lost the battle.
Talking baseball here inside the stadium studios. I am Dave Ross, joined by our GM, our manager, and our player, Steve Phillips, John Farrell, Trevor Plouffe. And gentlemen, for the first time since the 1910s, a decade of Major League Baseball has come and gone, and the New York Yankees are not in a World Series. I can't still wrap my head around that fact. Steve, I'll start with you on this one as a GM. What do you think is the number one thing you would attribute it to as to why the Yankees went a full decade without making it to the Fall Classic?
I think it's because there's other good teams out there. I mean, the whole notion that Yankees and their fans have that it's a failed season if they don't win a World Series it's arrogant. I mean, there are other good teams out there. They had the most regular season wins in the decade. They went to the playoffs 7 times, tied for the most with the Dodgers. And so it was a good decade. They just didn't win once they got to the postseason. Starting pitching is probably the biggest thing, where they're probably not quite what they used to be. But they had no business making the playoffs this year at all, considering 30 different players went on the injured list. It was a remarkable year. And so, look, they're not victims. I don't feel bad for them. They're heading in the right direction. They're going to be right there again to win next year. And it just happens to be a window of 10 years that we're going to call a decade. They're going to be back to the World Series soon.
John, you know what it's like to manage in a fishbowl, certainly in Boston, and winning a World Series there. What about Steve's point? In New York, it's looked at as a failure if you don't win. I can't even imagine that pressure.
Well, the expectation is not to contend or rebuild. It's always to reload. So I can completely empathize and understand the mindset of the New York fan base. Very similar to what was experienced in Boston. And it just goes to show you that inside of a 5 or 7 game series, you run up against a pitching staff that might be hot, pitching against a quality lineup as New York will always put on the field. And I think that's one of the main things that contributes to them being 10 years coming up dry. But I would concur with Steve that power in their rotation has lacked over this 10-year period. There's some ingredients in place right now to build going forward. But winning that number of games, not many people are going to feel sorry for them.
Absolutely not. Trevor, I wonder, for you playing predominantly in Minnesota, is this kind of like, all right, cool, the big guy doesn't always win. Is this good, do you think, for the other players in the game to say it's not always just the Yankees and the Red Sox, but other teams can get in the mix here?
Yeah, you know what I love about the Yankees fans and the Yankees organization being mad about not being in a World Series is that they're trying to compete every year. And we love that. As players, we want every team to be trying to compete to win a World Series. We know that's not the case anymore, but you got to give kudos to them for that. I think the biggest thing that's gone on with them is they've kind of curbed their spending a little bit. You know, when George was around, they'd go after every single top free agent target on the market. And I think now, because of the luxury tax threshold starting to go up if you're a repeat offender, I think that Hal and the rest of the organization has curbed spending a little bit. They've seen the Astros model, the Cubs model right in front of them, where these guys are growing homegrown talent and then spending when they're ready. And I think that when you see that right in front of you, you try to copy it a little bit. And they've done a good job developing their farm system, but at the cost of maybe missing out on some of those free agent starters like a David Price, or maybe even this year with Cole.
I do wonder, a bigger picture here, gentlemen, if it's good for the game and what it says about the game. Steve, I almost get the sense that this is just kind of like, well, it's an anomaly here that they just happened to go 10 years. Is there a bigger picture at hand of analytics, and as Trevor's getting to spending, what do we make, and is it good for baseball with other teams getting in the mix?
Well, first I would say this. I think that every team in baseball should be grateful for the Yankees, right? We need a villain in a sport, and that's kind of the role that the Yankees have played, the evil empires, as John Henry and Larry Lucchino once referenced them. And so you sort of need that team. And to Trevor's point, they're not spending like they used to spend. And with the growth of analytics, it has narrowed some of the competitive gap and given lesser teams with spending a better opportunity to compete and win. You've got smarter people making decisions. And so I think it is good that it does open the door. I mean, the last repeat World Series champion we have are the Yankees. Going back to 99 through 98 through 2000, we haven't had this sort of repeat winner. It does open the door. There is more parity available, and I think it gives hope to more cities. But we don't want to lose the villain aspect of it either, because when it comes to luxury tax money, when it comes to visiting teams coming in and how many tickets you sell, we need the Yankees to be a thriving franchise for sure.
John, I guess you would concur too for Boston, right? Because some people now look at the Red Sox as a villain of sorts too, because they've had success certainly in the last couple decades here. Is this okay for baseball that the Yankees go 10 plus years without making it to a World Series?
Oh, I think so. And I think, the vast majority of baseball is going to look upon the big market teams in that light. They don't have the ability to overcome some of their mistakes by maybe going out and acquiring and backfilling because of the amount of money that they do have. So, the Yankees, Red Sox, Dodgers, Cubs, Cardinals, they're always going to be the target because of their place in history and certainly their markets in which they play in. So, as we said before, they've got the ability to overcome some mistakes, and people are never going to look upon them, in a forgiving manner if things don't work.
Absolutely, Trevor. It's weird. As a Metropolitan fan growing up for me, I look at the Mets as a small market. They play in New York. It's not a small market, but yet we don't put certain teams in that category. Is this okay, again, for baseball? Because I find myself rooting for the Twins or rooting for the A's, or the perception that the little guy can then beat the big guy. Do you think this is good for baseball because the Astros used to be the little guy, and now they're the big guy?
Yeah, I think everybody loves an underdog story. So I think that's kind of where this all stems from. I always love going into the bigger cities trying to beat these teams. But the reality is that there's 30 professional baseball teams, and there's different ways to do it. You don't have to spend a ton of money to do it. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing with the Yankees. They're kind of realizing that, like, hey, we don't have to spend a ton of money. Let's go build our farm system up. Maybe let's make some trades once we build that farm system up. And I think, to Steve's point earlier, they've made the postseason 7 times in this decade, so it's definitely not a failure. No one's feeling bad for them, but I just think they're just going at it a little bit differently, and it is good for baseball to have that type of villain, no doubt.
Yeah, and no doubt for sure, as you guys know, Yankee fans are not happy with this conversation we're having. They want it to change next year. Trevor Plouffe, John Farrell, Steve Phillips, always enjoy the baseball conversations right here at Stadium.